Why a medieval castle was a total death trap. Are you ready for a new bedtime story? But first, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps us know that you enjoy listening to these stories. Now, get comfortable, relax, and let's begin our story. The Stone Apprentice's Dawn. In the gentle mist of a land called Somnolentia, where the morning sun painted the hills in soft shades of gold and amber, there lived a young man named Eldrick. Softly the stones fell from his careful hands as he learned the ancient craft of building, and gently the dawn came each day to find him already at work in the castle courtyard. Eldrick was an apprentice stonemason, barely 20 summers old, with callous hands that spoke of honest work and eyes that sparkled with curiosity about the great stone fortress that had become his world. The castle of Drowsy Haven stood upon a hill like a sleeping giant, its towers reaching toward the clouds as if trying to touch the dreams that floated there. Each morning, as the dew still clung to the grass and the birds sang their first tentative songs, Eldrick would walk from his small chamber in the castle's lower levels to begin his work. His footsteps echoed softly through the corridors, a rhythmic pattern that seemed to match the gentle breathing of the castle itself. Softly the stones fell, gently the morning came, and peacefully the young mason began each day with hope in his heart. The castle had been his home for 3 years now, ever since Master Gorvain, the chief stonemason, had taken him as an apprentice. Gorvain was a kind man with a white beard that reached his chest and hands. So skilled they seemed to speak directly to the stone. Under his patient guidance, Eldrick had learned to cut and shape the great blocks that formed the castle's walls, to mix mortar that would hold for centuries, and to read the subtle signs that told him when stone was strong and when it might fail. But as the seasons turned and Eldrick's skills grew, he began to notice things about Drowsy Haven Castle that troubled his practical mind. The fortress was ancient, built by generations of rulers who had each added their own towers, walls, and chambers without much thought for how they all fit together, like a patchwork quilt made by many different seamstresses. The castle was a maze of conflicting styles and questionable choices. Softly the stones fell from walls that had been built too hastily. Gently the rain came through roofs that leaked like sieves. And slowly, very slowly, young Elder began to understand that the mighty fortress of Drowsy Haven was, in truth, a place where danger lurked in every shadow and around every corner. The morning of our tale began like any other, with mist rising from the moat and the first pale light of dawn touching the castle's highest towers. Eldrick stretched and yawned in his narrow bed, feeling the familiar ache in his shoulders from yesterday's work. Through a small window, he could see the great walls of the castle stretching away into morning haze, solid and imposing to the eye, but he knew better than most how those walls were truly built. As he dressed in his simple tunic and hose, pulling on his leather apron and gathering his tools, Eldrick's mind wandered to all the peculiar things he had observed during his time at Drowsy Haven. There was the tower that swayed in strong winds, built too tall and too narrow by an ambitious lord who had cared more about impressing visitors than about basic engineering. There were the stairs that had been carved at impossible angles, making it treacherous to climb them even in broad daylight. And there was the great hall, with its magnificent vaulted ceiling that shed small stones like autumn leaves whenever thunder rumbled overhead. Softly the stones fell, and Eldrick had learned to listen for that gentle sound, for it often warned of greater troubles to come. Gently the morning came, bringing with it another day of discoveries about the castle's hidden perils, and peacefully, with the acceptance that comes to those who work with their hands and understand the patience required for all good things, Eldrick prepared to face whatever challenges the day might bring. He made his way down the winding stairs from his chamber, noting as always how the steps were worn, smooth by centuries of feet, creating treacherous hollows that could catch an unwary foot. The walls here were damp with moisture that seeped through cracks in the mortar, and green moss grew in patches. Where the stone was softest, these details, invisible to most who lived in the castle, were as clear as, riding to Eldrick's trained eye, in the castle's main corridor, he passed other early risers beginning their day. There was Millicent, the cook, already heading to the kitchens with her arms full of herbs from the castle garden. She nodded to Eldrick with a smile, but he noticed how carefully she placed each step, how she kept one hand trailing along the wall for balance. Millicent, he had learned, was perhaps the wisest person in all of Drowsy Haven, for she understood better than anyone how to navigate the castle's hidden dangers. "Good morning, young Eldrick," she called softly, her voice carrying the warm cadence of someone who had learned to speak gently in a place where sudden noises could sometimes bring unexpected consequences. "Mind the third step on the kitchen stairs today. I felt it shift yesterday when young Tom came running down with news from the stables." Eldrick nodded gratefully. Millicent's warnings had saved him from countless small mishaps, and he had learned to trust her keen awareness of every creak, groan, and whisper that the castle made. She had lived in Drowsy Haven for 40 years, arriving as a young scullery maid and working her way up to head, cooked through patience, skill, and an almost supernatural ability to sense when things were about to go wrong. As he continued through the corridor, Eldrick reflected on how the castle's inhabitants had adapted to their unusual home. They all walked a little more carefully than people in other places, listened a little more intently to the sounds their home made, and had developed an almost intuitive sense for which parts of the castle could be trusted and which required extra caution. Softly the stones fell in distant parts of the castle, a sound so common that most residents no longer consciously heard it. Gently the morning light came filtering through windows that were placed more for defense than illumination, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted like breathing throughout the day. And slowly, with the measured pace of those who know that haste often leads to misfortune, the people of Drowsy Haven began another day in their remarkable and remarkably hazardous home. The castle's main courtyard was Eldrick's destination this morning, for Master Gorvain had planned to begin work on reinforcing one of the outer walls. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door that led outside, Eldrick was greeted by the familiar sight of Drowsy Haven's central space, surrounded by towers, and buildings that seemed to lean in toward each other, like old friends sharing secrets. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of horses from the stables, bread baking in the kitchens, and that particular smell of old stone that Eldrick had come to love. Dew sparkled on the cobblestones of the courtyard, and somewhere high above, a lark was singing its morning song. For a moment, standing in the peaceful dawn light, it was easy to forget about all the ways at Drowsy Haven. Castle was imperfectly, charmingly, and thoroughly dangerous, but only for a moment, for as Eldrick's eyes adjusted to the outdoor light, he could see all too clearly the signs that he had learned to read. The slight outward bulge in the eastern wall that indicated the mortar was failing. The iron-barred windows of the third floor that hung at slightly different angles because the wooden frames behind them were rotting. The beautiful carved stones around the main entrance that were slowly crumbling because the sculptor had weakened them with too much decorative detail. Softly the stones fell from a gargoyle high on the chapel tower, landing in the soft earth of the herb, garden with barely a whisper sound. Gently the morning breeze came, stirring the banners that hung from the castle's walls and revealing how many of the flagpoles had begun to bend under the constant stress of wind and weather. And peacefully, because this was simply how life was in Drowsy Haven, Eldrick began to set up his tools for another day of trying to keep the ancient fortress from slowly collapsing around its inhabitants. As Eldrick arranged his chisels and hammers on the wooden workbench that Master Gorvain had built against the courtyard's eastern wall, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps on stone, accompanied by a voice muttering softly to itself. He looked up to see Master Cornelius approaching, the castle's chief, architect, a man whose brilliant mind contained the plans for every addition, modification, and repair that had been made to Drowsy Haven in the past 30 years. Master Cornelius was a tall, thin man with wild white hair that seemed to have a mind of its own and pale, blue eyes that could spot a structural weakness from across the courtyard. He carried with him, always, a leather satchel filled with scrolls of parchment covered in detailed drawings, measurements, and notes, written in his careful, tiny handwriting. The difficulty was that Master Cornelius, for all his undeniable skill and knowledge, had a memory that seemed to work like morning mist, sometimes clear and sharp, sometimes mysteriously absent. "Ah, young Eldrick," Master Cornelius said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had spent decades solving complex problems. "I trust you slept well? No falling stones in the night? No sudden settling of foundations?" These questions were not mere pleasantries in Drowsy Haven. They were genuine inquiries about the castle's nocturnal behavior. "A peaceful night, Master Cornelius," Eldrick replied, setting down his favorite hammer, "though I did hear what sounded like creaking from somewhere in the north tower around midnight." "Ah, yes, the north tower," Master Cornelius nodded, reaching into his satchel and pulling out a rolled parchment. "Now, was that the north tower where we reinforced the floor joist last spring, or was that the northwest tower? Or perhaps—" He paused, unrolling the parchment and studying it with a puzzled expression. This appears to be the plans for the castle's water system. Not what I was looking for at all. This was typical of Master Cornelius. His mind contained an enormous amount of information about every aspect of Drowsy Haven's construction, but accessing that information was sometimes like trying to find a particular book in a library where the shelves kept rearranging themselves. He would begin to explain some crucial detail about the castle's architecture, then pause mid-sentence, distracted by a completely different but equally important concern. Softly, the morning air stirred the parchments in Master Cornelius's satchel, and he looked up with the expression of someone who had just remembered something very important. "Eldrick, my boy, I believe I came out here to discuss something with you." Something about, was it the buttresses on the Great Hall? No, that was yesterday. Or perhaps it was last week. Time moves so strangely when one spends it, thinking about stone and mortar. Gently the sun climbed higher in the morning sky, warming the stones of the courtyard and causing the castle's walls to expand slightly, as they did every day. This daily expansion and contraction Master Cornelius had once explained during one of his clearer moments was one of the many stresses that gradually weakened even the strongest construction, peacefully, like the breathing of some vast sleeping creature. Drowsy Haven Castle grew and shrank with the rhythm of day and night, season after season. Master Cornelius, Eldrick said with the patient tone he had learned to use when speaking with the architect, "I believe you wanted to show me the plans for the wall reinforcement we're beginning today." "Ah, yes, precisely." Master Cornelius's face brightened, and he began shuffling through his parchments with renewed purpose. The eastern wall of the courtyard. A fascinating problem, really. You see, when Lord Aldrich built that section, or was it Lord Edmund, one of the Aldrichs, certainly they were all quite fond of building things without consulting anyone who actually understood engineering. Well, whoever, it was used limestone blocks that were far too porous for a load-bearing wall. As he spoke, Master Cornelius's voice took on the dreamy quality it always had when he was explaining technical matters. His pale eyes seemed to look not at the wall in question, but at some vision of structural forces and weight distribution that only he could see. The mortar between the stones is made from lime and sand, perfectly adequate for most purposes, but in this particular location, where the wall supports not only its own weight, but also the weight of the third-floor chambers and the tower above. Well, it's rather like asking a butterfly to carry an ox, if you take my meaning. Eldrick did take his meaning, and he found it somewhat alarming. Is the wall in danger collapse? Master? Collapse? Master Cornelius looked up from his parchments with surprise, as if the question had come from nowhere. "Oh, my dear boy, I wouldn't worry about sudden collapse. These things happen very gradually, you know. First, you might notice small cracks appearing in the mortar. Then, perhaps, a stone or two might work loose and fall. Softly the stones fall, as they say. Then, over time, the wall begins to lean outward, just a tiny bit at first, hardly noticeable unless you know what to look for." The architect's tone remained completely calm and matter-of-fact, as if he were describing the process of baking bread rather than the gradual failure of a massive stone wall. This was another master. Cornelius's endearing but sometimes unsettling qualities. His complete acceptance of the fact that buildings, like all things, were temporary constructions that would eventually return to the earth from which they came. The good news, Master Cornelius continued, finally locating the correct parchment and unrolling it to reveal a detailed drawing of the eastern wall, is that we have plenty of time to address the problem. I estimate that without intervention, this wall might begin to show serious structural weakness in, perhaps 15 or 20 years. Possibly sooner if we have particularly harsh winters, or if there are earthquakes, or if someone decides to build another tower on top of it. Softly the morning breeze rustled the parchment as Master Cornelius held it up for Eldrick to examine. The drawing was incredibly detailed, showing not only the visible surface of the wall, but also its internal structure, the pattern of stones and mortar, and the various forces acting upon it. Gently the architect's finger traced the lines of stress that he had calculated, indicating where the wall was strongest and where it was most vulnerable. "You see here," Master Cornelius said, pointing to a section of the drawing, "this is where Lord Aldrich, definitely Lord Aldrich, I remember now because he had that peculiar habit of insisting that all stones be carved with his initials, decided to create a decorative niche for a statue. Beautiful craftsmanship, really, but it created a weak point in the wall's structure. And here, his finger moved to another spot. Someone, at some point, decided to install a fireplace, which required cutting through the stone to create a flue. Again, not necessarily a problem in itself, but when you combine it with the original design flaws." The architect's voice trailed off as he became absorbed in studying his own drawing, and for several minutes he stood in complete silence, occasionally making small humming sounds as if he were having a conversation with the parchment. This, too, was typical behavior for Master Cornelius, and Eldrick had learned to wait patiently during these thoughtful interludes. Finally, Master Cornelius looked up with a pleased expression of someone who has just solved a puzzle. The solution, of course, is to add additional support buttresses along this section of the wall. Nothing too dramatic. We're not trying to build a cathedral. After all, just enough to distribute the weight more evenly and compensate for the original designs. Optimistic assumptions about the strength of limestone, peacefully, as if discussing the most natural thing in the world, Master Cornelius began to explain his plan for preventing the gradual collapse of a wall that had been slowly failing for decades. His tone remained calm and unhurried, as if there were all the time in the world to address every flaw in Drowsy Havens. Construction, one careful repair at a time. "We'll start with the foundation," he continued, rolling up the parchment and selecting another from his satchel. "Always start with the foundation, young Eldrick. A building is only as strong as what it rests upon, and I have some concerns about the footing beneath this particular wall. When it was originally constructed, I don't believe anyone properly accounted for the way water drains through this section of the courtyard during heavy rains." As Master Cornelius spoke, Eldrick found himself both comforted and slightly alarmed by the architect's casual attitude toward the castle's structural problems. On one hand, it was reassuring to know that someone understood exactly what was wrong with Drowsy Haven and how to fix it. On the other hand, the sheer number of issues that required attention was somewhat overwhelming. Now, where did I put those measurements? Master Cornelius muttered, shuffling through his parchments once again. I took very careful notes yesterday about the depth of the foundation stones, but I seem to have. Here they are. No, wait, this is my grocery list. Millicent asked me to pick up more herbs from the village, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. Very important to write things down. No, the mind is like a sieve, and memories slip through the holes if you're not careful. Softly the morning light grew stronger, warming the courtyard and bringing the sounds of the castle, awakening fully to life. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied from the stables, and the sound of conversation drifted from the kitchen windows. Gently the day progressed, and with it the comfortable rhythm of life in Drowsy Haven, where people had learned to live peacefully alongside the gradual decay of their magnificent and magnificently flawed home. The night's graceful stumbles. As Master Cornelius continued his search through the maze of parchments in his leather satchel, the peaceful morning air of the courtyard was suddenly filled with the distinctive sound of someone in heavy armor attempting to navigate stairs designed by people who had apparently never worn armor themselves. The clanking, scraping, and occasional muttered curse that echoed from the direction of the main keep could only mean one thing. Sir Bumblethorn was beginning his day. Sir Reginald Bumblethorn was Drowsy Haven Castle's most stalwart defender, a knight whose courage was matched only by his remarkable ability to find the one loose stone in any staircase, the one low beam in any doorway, and the one patch of slippery moss on any walkway. He was not clumsy by nature. Indeed, on horseback or in open combat, he moved with the fluid grace of someone born to warfare. But the castle of Drowsy Haven, with its maze of inconsistent architecture and structural quirks, seemed specifically designed to challenge even the most coordinated individual. The clanking grew louder as Sir Bumblethorn emerged from the keep's main entrance, resplendent in his polished mail and surcoat bearing the castle's arms. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind brown eyes and a mustache that he kept waxed to perfect points. His armor gleamed in the morning sun, every piece carefully maintained and properly fitted. Yet as he stepped into the courtyard, Eldrick could see that his left gauntlet was held together with wire, evidence of his most recent encounter with one of the castle's architectural hazards. "Good morning, Master Cornelius." Young Eldrick, Sir Bumblethorn called out cheerfully, raising his right hand in greeting, while carefully watching where he placed his feet on the courtyard's uneven cobblestones. Beautiful day for, blast these stones. His greeting was punctuated by a small stumble as his armored foot found one of the cobblestones that had worked loose from its setting. Sir Bumblethorn recovered quickly, but not before executing a small dance of balance that caused his sword to rattle in its scabbard and his mail to jingle like wind chimes in a breeze. "Quite right, Sir Reginald," Master Cornelius replied absently, still searching through his parchments. Though I do believe someone should look at those cobblestones one of these days. I have a theory that the mortar beneath them was mixed incorrectly, possibly with too much sand and not enough lime, which would cause it to erode more quickly when exposed to moisture and foot traffic. Softly, the morning breeze stirred Sir Bumblethorn's surcoat as he approached their little group, and Eldrick couldn't help but notice the careful way the knight moved. Each step was placed deliberately, and his eyes constantly scanned the ground ahead of him. This was not paranoia, but hard-won wisdom, for Sir Bumblethorn had learned through experience that Drowsyhaven Castle held surprises for the unwary at every turn. I don't suppose either of you gentlemen has seen the castle's cat this morning? Sir Bumblethorn asked, removing his helmet and tucking it under his arm. Lady Whiskers seems to have gone missing, and I'm concerned she might have gotten herself stuck somewhere. You know how she likes to explore, and there are so many places in this castle where a curious cat might find herself in difficulties. Gently, the knight's voice carried genuine concern, for Lady Whiskers was beloved by everyone in Drowsyhaven. She was a sleek gray tabby with white paws who served as the castle's chief mouse catcher, but more importantly, she had an almost supernatural ability to sense when parts of the castle were becoming unsafe. More than once, her refusal to enter a particular room or walk down a specific corridor had warned the inhabitants of impending structural problems. I saw her early this morning, Eldrick said, setting down his chisel. She was sitting in the herb garden, watching the sparrows, but that was just after dawn. Well, she'll turn up, Sir Bumblethorn said with a philosophical acceptance that all castle residents learn to cultivate. She always does, usually in places where no sensible creature should be able to go. Last week I found her napping in the bell tower, 2 floors above where the stairs end. I still haven't worked out how she got there. Peacefully, as was his nature, Sir Bumblethorn accepted the mysteries of both cats and castles as simply part of life's great adventure. His cheerful disposition was one of his most admirable qualities, and it served him well in a place where minor disasters were as common as morning mist. If I may ask, Sir Reginald, Master Cornelius said, looking up from his parchments with sudden interest, have you noticed any unusual sounds from the North Tower recently? Young Eldrick mentioned hearing creaking during the night, and I'm trying to determine whether it might be related to the timber supports I installed there last. Was it last month or last year? Time has a way of slipping away from one when dealing with construction projects. Sir Bumblethorn considered the question seriously, his brow furrowed in thought. Now that you mention it, I have noticed something. Not creaking exactly, but more of a settling sound, like the way a ship's timbers groan when it's riding at anchor. I assumed it was just the tower adjusting to changes in temperature, the way old buildings do. Yes, that could be perfectly normal, Master Cornelius mused, or it could indicate that the timber is beginning to compress under load. I should probably examine it more closely. The thing about wood, you see, is that it's wonderfully strong when it's properly seasoned and correctly installed. But it does have a tendency to, well, to behave in unexpected ways over time. Softly, the conversation continued in the warm morning air, with Master Cornelius explaining the various ways that wooden supports could fail, and Sir Bumblethorn listening with the patient attention of someone who had learned that understanding his home's quirks was essential for survival. The knight had lived in Drowsy Haven for 7 years, ever since he had arrived as a young man seeking his fortune, and he had gradually developed an almost intimate knowledge of the castle's moods and habits. "The northwest staircase gave me quite a start yesterday," Sir Bumblethorn mentioned casually, as if discussing the weather. "The 7th step from the bottom. You know the one, Master Cornelius. It's been loose for months. Well, it finally gave way completely. Nothing dramatic, just cracked right through the middle when I put my weight on it. I managed to catch myself on the handrail, but it was touch and go for a moment." "Ah, yes, I've been meaning to address that particular step," Master Cornelius said, making a note on one of his parchments. "The problem is that it was carved from a piece of stone that had a natural flaw in it, a vein of softer rock running right through the middle. It was probably fine for the first 50 years or so, but constant use eventually found the weak point." Gently, the architect's pencil moved across the parchment as he sketched a quick diagram of the problematic stair, showing where the stone had failed and how it might be repaired. His drawing was precise and detailed, despite being completed in just a few moments, and Eldrick marveled once again at Master Cornelius's ability to see the hidden structure of things. "I took the liberty of placing a wooden board over the broken step," Sir Bumblethorn continued, "and I've been warning people to be careful when using that staircase, but I thought you should know that it's become priority repair." Quite right," Master Cornelius nodded approvingly. "Temporary solutions are often the wisest approach when dealing with structural problems. Rush to permanent repairs, and you might overlook important factors that only become apparent with time and observation." Peacefully, the 3 men stood in the morning sunshine, discussing the castle's latest small catastrophe, with the calm acceptance that came from living in a place where such incidents were part of daily life. There was no panic, no sense of crisis, just a practical consideration of how to solve a problem and prevent similar ones in the future. "Speaking of priorities," Sir Bumblethorn said, adjusting his sword belt, "I should probably check on the gate mechanism this morning. I've been hearing some concerning sounds from the portcullis lately. Nothing urgent, but you know how these things can develop if they're not attended to promptly." "Ah, the portcullis," Master Cornelius sighed, his expression becoming slightly pained. "That particular mechanism was installed by Lord Edmund's younger brother, who fancied himself an engineer. Brilliant fellow, very enthusiastic, but he had some rather creative ideas about how pulleys and counterweights should work. I've been meaning to redesign the entire system, but it's such a complex project, and there are so many other pressing matters." Softly, the morning air carried the distant sound of the castle's daily activities beginning in earnest. From the stables came the sound of horses being fed and groomed. From the kitchens came the clatter of pots. and pans as breakfast preparations began. And from various parts of the castle came the gentle sounds of masonry settling, timber creaking, and all the other small noises that indicated Drowsy Haven was waking up and stretching like a great stone creature greeting the day. "Well," Sir Bumblethorne said, replacing his helmet and preparing to continue his morning rounds, "I should let you gentlemen get to your work. But before I go, I thought you might like to know that I noticed some interesting cracks in the mortar around the Great Hall's windows yesterday evening. Nothing alarming, but they seem to have grown since the last time I looked." "Growing cracks," Master Cornelius repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, that would be consistent with the seasonal expansion and contraction I was discussing earlier. The mortar around windows is particularly vulnerable because it has to accommodate movement from both the wall and the window frame. I should examine them soon before the autumn rains begin." Gently the knight nodded his understanding, then began his careful journey across the courtyard toward the gatehouse. His progress was a masterpiece of cautious navigation as he avoided the loose cobblestones, stepped over a small depression where water tended to collect after rain, and ducked slightly as he passed beneath the archway where centuries of settling had lowered the clearance by several inches. Watching Sir Bumblethorne's departure, Eldrick reflected on how all the residents of Drowsy Haven had developed their own strategy for living safely in their beautiful but challenging home. The knight's careful movements were not the result of fear or anxiety, but of wisdom earned through experience. Like a sailor learning to read the moods of the sea, Sir Bumblethorne had learned to read the moods of the castle, and this knowledge kept him safe while allowing him to fulfill his duties with honor and effectiveness. "A good man, Sir Reginald," Master Cornelius commented, watching the knight's progress. "One of the few people who truly understands that living in an old castle requires both courage and common sense. Too much of either can be dangerous, but the right balance, well, that's what allows us all to call Drowsy Haven home." Softly the morning breeze stirred the parchments in Master Cornelius's satchel once more, and the architect returned his attention to the task at hand. Gently the sun continued its climb through the clear sky, warming the stones of the courtyard and promising a beautiful day for outdoor work. And peacefully, with the unhurried rhythm that characterized all life in Drowsy Haven, the inhabitants of the castle continued their eternal dance of maintenance, repair, and adaptation to their magnificent and magnificently imperfect home. As the morning sun climbed higher and the sounds of breakfast preparation grew more distinct, Eldrick found his attention drawn toward the tantalizing aromas drifting from the castle's kitchens. The scent of fresh bread, simmering porridge, and herbs from Millicent's garden created an almost irresistible invitation to abandon stonework in favor of breaking his fast. Master Cornelius, too, seemed to notice the appealing smells, for he paused in his examination of architectural drawings and gazed thoughtfully toward the kitchen windows. "I believe," Master Cornelius announced with the air of someone making an important decision, "that we should perhaps consult with Millicent about the structural issues affecting the kitchen wing. After all, She's the person most familiar with how the building behaves on a daily basis, and her observations could be quite valuable to our work. This was perfectly logical reasoning, though Eldrick suspected that the architect's sudden interest in consulting the cook had as much to do with the smell of fresh bread as with structural engineering. Not that it mattered. Millicent's insights were indeed valuable, and her kitchen was a warm, welcoming place that seemed to exert gravitational pull on everyone in the castle around meal times. They made their way across the courtyard, past a well with its slightly tilted cover stone and the herb garden where Lady Whiskers could often be found stalking insects among the sage and thyme. The kitchen occupied the ground floor of the castle's western wing, and as they approached, Eldrick could hear the familiar sounds of Millicent directing her small staff of assistants in the morning's culinary preparations. Softly, the wooden door creaked as Master Cornelius pushed it open, the sound barely audible over the gentle bustle of kitchen activity. Inside, the space was filled with warm, golden light from the large windows that Millicent had specifically requested when the kitchen was renovated 15 years earlier. The room was dominated by a massive hearth where a fire burned steadily, its flames licking at the bottom of a large iron pot suspended from a hook and chain mechanism that Master Cornelius had designed himself. Gently, the morning light streamed through windows that were positioned to catch the sun at the most useful angles for food preparation, and the entire space seemed to radiate the kind of comfortable warmth that made visitors want to linger. This was Millicent's domain, and she had arranged it with the same careful attention to both practicality and safety that characterized all her activities. Millicent herself stood at the large wooden table in the center of the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread with the rhythmic, meditative motions of someone who had performed this task thousands of times. She was a woman of middle years with graying brown hair that she kept neatly braided and kind, hazel eyes that missed nothing. Her dress was simple but well made, covered by a spotless apron that she changed twice daily without fail. Master Cornelius, young Eldrick. She greeted them with a smile, never pausing in her kneading. Perfect timing, as always. I was just thinking that this kitchen could benefit from your expert opinions on a small matter that's been troubling me. Peacefully, as was her way, Millicent continued her work while speaking, her hands moving in steady rhythm as she folded and pressed the dough. The kitchen around her was a model of organized efficiency, with every pot, pan, and utensil in its proper place, and every surface clean and ready for use. But Eldrick, with his mason's eye for structural details, could see the subtle signs that indicated this. Seemingly perfect space was not without its own architectural challenges. What sort of trouble, my dear Millicent? Master Cornelius asked, settling onto a stool near the hearth, and accepting the cup of warm cider that young Tom, one of the kitchen assistants, brought him without being asked. Well, Millicent said, pausing in her kneading to gesture toward the far corner of the kitchen. It's that section of floor over by the pantry. For the past month or so, it's been developing a rather alarming tendency to slope downward. Not dramatically, mind you, but enough that I've had to prop up the legs of the storage chest to keep it level. Softly, the concern in her voice was audible, though she maintained the calm tone that she used for all of life's challenges, large and small. Millicent had learned, through years of managing a busy kitchen in an ancient castle, that panic rarely improved any situation, while careful observation and thoughtful planning could solve almost any problem. Master Cornelius immediately became alert, setting down his cider and moving to examine the area. Millicent had indicated. "A sloping floor," he murmured, kneeling to run his hands over the stone surface. This could indicate several different issues. Settlement of the foundation beneath, failure of the supporting joists above, or possibly moisture damage to the underlying structure. Gently, he pressed against different sections of the floor, listening to the subtle sounds at the stone, made in response to pressure. His trained ear could detect the difference between solid, well-supported masonry in areas where the foundation might be compromising. "Millicent, have you noticed any correlation between this sloping and the weather? Does it seem worse after heavy rains, for instance?" "Now that you mention it," Millicent replied, dividing her dough into portions for individual loaves. "I did notice that the slope seemed more pronounced after that terrible storm we had 3 weeks ago. The one that flooded the lower courtyard and sent water cascading down the stairs like a waterfall." Peacefully, she continued shaping the bread while discussing what was potentially a serious structural problem. This was typical of Millicent's approach to life's challenges. She acknowledged them fully, but refused to let worry interfere with the day's necessary tasks. The bread still needed to be baked, regardless of whether the kitchen floor was slowly sinking into the earth. "That's very helpful information," Master Cornelius said, making notes on a piece of parchment he had pulled from his satchel. "It suggests that water drainage beneath this section of the castle may be inadequate. When Lord Edmund expanded the kitchen wing, I believe he may not have properly considered how the new construction would affect the natural flow of groundwater." Eldrick watched the architect's investigation with fascination, noting how Master Cornelius used all his senses to gather information about the building's condition. He pressed his ear to the walls, tapped the floor stones with his knuckles, and even sniffed the air near the problematic area, searching for any hint of moisture or decay that might indicate hidden damage. "The good news," Master Cornelius announced after several minutes of careful examination, "is that this appears to be a gradual settling rather than an acute structural failure. The bad news is that it will likely continue to worsen unless we address the underlying drainage issues." Softly, the fire crackled in the great hearth, and the comfortable sounds of kitchen work continued around them as Millicent's assistants went about their morning tasks. Young Tom was carefully polishing the copper pots until they gleamed like mirrors, while Sarah, the scullery maid, methodically washed the breakfast dishes in a wooden tub filled with hot, soapy water. "I've been working around it quite successfully," Millicent said with characteristic practicality. "I simply avoid placing anything too heavy in that corner, and I've learned to compensate for slope when I'm working with liquids. It's really no different from any of the other little adjustments one learns to make when living in an old castle. Gently she moved about her kitchen with the fluid grace of someone who knew every stone, every beam, and every quirk of her workspace. Millicent had developed an almost supernatural awareness of her environment, able to sense changes in temperature, humidity, and even the subtle shifts in air pressure that preceded storms. This sensitivity made her one of the most valuable sources of information about the castle's behavior. "You mentioned adjustments," Master Cornelius said with interest. "What other accommodations have you had to make over the years?" Millicent smiled, clearly pleased to have someone ask about her expertise. "Well, there's the matter of the chimney draft, for instance. During the winter months, when the wind comes from the northwest, the smoke has a tendency to blow back down into the kitchen rather than going up and out as it should. I've learned to build the fire differently on those days, using drier wood and arranging the logs to create a stronger updraft." As she spoke, Millicent demonstrated by adjusting the logs of the fireplace, using a long iron poke or two, create small gaps that would allow air to flow more efficiently. The flames responded immediately, burning brighter and drawing more strongly up the chimney. "Fascinating," Master Cornelius murmured, making more notes. "That suggests that the chimney may not be properly aligned with the prevailing winds, or perhaps that modifications to other parts of the castle have altered the air currents around this wing." Peacefully, the conversation continued as Millicent shared her accumulated knowledge of the kitchen's various idiosyncrasies. She explained how the large wooden table had to be repositioned twice a year because the floor beneath it had developed a slight wave pattern that caused it to rock unless the legs were placed in exactly the right spots. She described the way certain cupboards had to be kept partially open during humid weather to prevent the wood from swelling and making the doors impossible to close. "And then there's the matter of the water supply," Millicent continued, moving to the stone sink where a steady stream of clear water flowed from a carved spout. "The pressure varies considerably depending on how much water is being used in other parts of the castle. In the morning, when people are washing up after waking, the flow here drops to barely a trickle, but in the afternoon, it runs so strongly that it sometimes splashes out of the basin." Softly the water continued its gentle flow as she spoke, and Eldrick noted how Millicent had placed a carefully shaped piece of wood in the basin to redirect the stream and prevent splashing. This was typical of her solutions, simple, effective, and crafted with a patient skill that came from years of solving small problems one at a time. "The water system is another of those projects I've been meaning to redesign," Master Cornelius admitted with a slightly sheepish expression. "The current arrangement dates back to Lord Aldrich's time, and it was never properly planned as a unified system. Each addition to the castle simply tapped into the existing pipes wherever it was most convenient, without considering the overall water pressure or distribution." Gently the morning light shifted as the sun continued its climb, creating new patterns of brightness and shadow throughout the kitchen. The windows that seemed perfectly positioned earlier now cast the working surfaces into partial shade, and Millicent automatically lit several candles to maintain adequate illumination for food preparation. I've learned to read the light throughout the day, she explained, noticing Eldrick's attention to her. Actions. The morning sun is perfect for kneading bread and preparing vegetables, but by midday, I need to work at the other end of the table where the shadows fall differently, and in the evening when I'm cooking the main meal, the firelight actually provides the best illumination for judging when meat is properly roasted. Peacefully, as she spoke, Millicent moved through her kitchen with the unconscious efficiency of long practice. Every gesture was economical and purposeful, whether she was adjusting the height of a pot over the fire, testing the temperature of the bread oven with her hand, or simply wiping down a surface that had accumulated flour during the morning's baking. It sounds as though you've developed a comprehensive understanding of the space and its requirements, Master Cornelius observed admiringly. Your insights will be invaluable as we plan improvements to the kitchen wing's structural support. I'm always happy to help, Millicent replied, beginning to arrange her shaped loaves on wooden boards for their final rising. After all, we're all working together to keep Drowsyhaven Castle functioning as well as it can. Each of us contributes what we know best, and somehow it all comes together into a place where people can live and work and be reasonably comfortable. Softly, the kitchen filled with the yeasty aroma of rising bread, a scent that seemed to embody all the warmth and security that Millicent created in her domain. Despite the sloping floor, the variable water, pressure, the temperamental chimney, and all the other small challenges that came with working in an ancient building, she had created a space that felt like the heart of the castle. As they prepared to leave the kitchen and return to their morning's work, Eldrick found himself reflecting on Millicent's approach to life in Drowsyhaven Castle. She didn't ignore the building's flaws or pretend they didn't exist, but neither did she allow them to interfere with her primary purpose of feeding the castle's inhabitants well and safely. Instead, she had learned to work with the building's quirks, adapting her methods and expectations to accommodate the realities of her environment. One more thing before you go, Millicent said, wiping her floury hands on her apron. I thought you should know that I've been hearing some unusual sounds from the storage cellar beneath the kitchen. Nothing alarming, just a sort of dripping that seemed to come and go without any obvious pattern. It might be worth investigating when you have time. Dripping in the cellar, Master Cornelius repeated, making another note. That could indicate moisture, infiltration, which might be related to the drainage problems affecting the kitchen floor. I'll add it to the list of areas requiring examination. Gently, the three of them made their way toward the kitchen door, passing the large hearth where the fire continued to burn steadily, providing heat for cooking and warmth against the morning chill. The kitchen felt like a refuge from the castle's various architectural challenges, a space where human ingenuity and patient adaptation had created comfort and functionality despite the building's inherent flaws. As they stepped back into the courtyard, Eldrick noticed how different the outside air felt after the warmth and moisture of the kitchen. The contrast reminded him that Drowsyhaven Castle was not a single, unified structure, but rather a collection of different spaces, each with its own microclimate and its own particular set of challenges and solutions. Millicent is quite remarkable, Master Cornelius commented as they walked back toward their work site. She has an intuitive understanding of how buildings behave that would be the envy of many trained architects. Her kitchen runs more smoothly than spaces that were designed with far more resources and theoretical knowledge. Peacefully, they returned to the business of preparing for the day's stonework. But Eldrick carried with him a deeper appreciation for the way that skill, patience, and careful observation could transform even the most challenging environment into a place of warmth and productivity. The castle's inhabitants had each found their own ways of thriving within its ancient walls, creating a community that was stronger and more resilient than any individual structure could ever be. As the evening shadows lengthened and the castle settled into the peaceful rhythms of nightfall, Eldrick found himself back in his own small chamber, a modest but comfortable space that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. The day's journey through Drowsy Haven's various architectural wonders and challenges had filled his mind with images, sounds, and sensations that seemed to dance through his thoughts like gentle memories of a beautiful but complex dream. Softly, the evening light filtered through his narrow window, painting the stone walls with the warm, golden hues that made even the most humble spaces in the castle seem touched with magic. His simple bed, with its wool mattress and hand-woven blankets, looked more inviting than any royal chamber after the long day of walking, climbing, and discovering the secrets hidden within Drowsy Haven's ancient walls. Gently, he removed his work apron and tools, setting them carefully in their accustomed places beside his workbench. The familiar weight of hammer and chisel in his hands reminded him of all the repairs and improvements he would help to make in the days and weeks to come, each one a small contribution to the ongoing conversation between the castle's inhabitants and their remarkable, imperfect home. As he prepared for sleep, Eldrick's mind wandered over all the discoveries of the day. He thought of Master Cornelius and his patient acceptance of architectural challenges that would frustrate lesser minds. He remembered Sir Bumblethorn's graceful adaptation to staircases and corridors that seemed designed to test the balance and coordination of anyone who used them. He recalled Millicent's mastery of a kitchen that required constant adjustment and accommodation, yet somehow produced the most delicious meals and the warmest hospitality. Peacefully, he settled into his bed, pulling the soft blankets up around his shoulders as the sounds of the castle's evening routine created a gentle symphony in the corridors beyond his door. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the faint drip of water from the great hall's weeping ceiling, a rhythmic sound that had become as much a part of Drowsy Haven's lullaby as the evening song of birds in the courtyard gardens. What would a perfect castle be like? Eldrick wondered aloud, his voice barely a whisper in the stone-enclosed quiet of his chamber. The question drifted through his mind as he lay listening to the subtle sounds that the castle made as it settled into night. The gentle creaking of timber, the soft whisper of wind around towers, the distant murmur of conversations from other chambers where fellow residents were ending their own days. In his drowsy imagination, Elder began to envision a castle where every stair had perfect proportions, where every roof never leaked, where every wall stood perfectly straight and true. He imagined corridors that were neither too narrow nor too wide, windows that provided ideal light at every hour, and chambers that maintained perfect temperature regardless of the season or weather. Softly his breathing deepened as sleep began to claim him, and his imagined perfect castle grew ever more elaborate in his mind. He saw towers that never swayed in the wind, moats that maintained consistent water levels, and kitchens where everything worked exactly as intended without need for clever adaptations or patient accommodations. But as his dream castle grew more and more perfect, something strange began to happen. The imagined halls, for all their flawless proportions, seemed somehow empty and cold. The perfectly straight walls felt rigid and unwelcoming. The ideal staircases, while easy to climb, lacked a character and personality that made Drowsy Haven's challenging steps into adventures rather than mere obstacles. Gently his dreaming mind began to populate his perfect castle with people, but they too seemed somehow diminished by the flawless environment, without the need to adapt and adjust, to develop skills and patience, to work together to solve problems and overcome challenges. The inhabitant of his perfect castle seemed to lack the warmth, creativity, and community spirit that made Drowsy Haven such a special place to live. Perhaps, Eldrick murmured in his half-sleep, the imperfections are what make it perfect after all. Peacefully, his dreams shifted and changed, and now he found himself back in the real Drowsy Haven, with all its quirks and challenges and unexpected beauties. He dreamed of walking through corridors where the stones had settled into comfortable curves, where the morning light fell in patterns that changed with each season, where every room held the accumulated warmth of generations of people who had learned to call imperfection home. In his dream, he saw Master Cornelius standing in the courtyard, his wild white hair catching the morning breeze as he consulted his endless scrolls and parchments. The architect's forgetful wisdom seemed less like a flaw and more like a gentle reminder that even the most knowledgeable people remain beautifully human, always learning, always adapting, always discovering new solutions to old problems. Softly in his sleep, Eldrick smiled as he dreamed of Sir Bumblethorn navigating the grand staircase with his characteristic combination of dignity and careful attention. The knight's graceful stumbles were not embarrassments but expressions of courage, the willingness to engage fully with a challenging world rather than retreating to safe, predictable spaces. He dreamed of Millicent in her kitchen, transforming a space filled with structural quirks into a place of nourishment and warmth. Her patient adaptations to sloping floors and temperamental chimneys seemed like acts of quiet magic, proof that human creativity could find beauty and function in the most unlikely circumstances. As the night deepened and the castle settled into its ancient rhythms of rest, Eldrick's dreams grew quieter and more gentle. He found himself walking through corridors he had never seen before, rooms that existed only in his sleeping imagination, but felt as real and familiar as his own chamber. These dream spaces were filled with the same loving imperfection that characterized all of Drowsy Haven. Floors that sloped just enough to be interesting, walls that curved in ways that made each room unique, windows that framed views of impossible beauty. And everywhere, the presence of people who had learned that home was not a place without problems, but a place where problems became opportunities for creativity, cooperation, and growth. Softly the stones fell in his dreams, but they fell gently, like rain that nourishes rather than destroys. Gently the morning came in his imagination, bringing with it not anxiety about the day's challenges, but excitement about the discoveries that awaited. And peacefully, with a deep contentment that comes only to those who have found their true home, Eldrick settled into the kind of sleep that repairs not just the body but the soul. Outside his window, Drowsy Haven Castle continued its eternal existence, breathing gently with the rhythms of night and day, expanding and contracting with the cycles of warmth and cold, sheltering its inhabitants with walls that were strong not because they were perfect, but because they were loved. In the great hall, water continued to drip from the magnificent ceiling, each drop adding to the gentle percussion that helped the castle's residents drift off to sleep. In the kitchen, Millicent's bread continued to rise, filling the air with the yeast-sweet scent of tomorrow's nourishment. On the battlements, the wind continued its eternal conversation with the stones, singing lullabies that had been centuries in the composing. Softly the night deepened around Drowsy Haven Castle, wrapping in darkness that was not empty but full of dreams and memories, full of the quiet sound of people at rest, full of the gentle presence of a building that had learned, over the centuries, how to be truly home to those who dwelt within its walls. And in his small chamber, Eldrick slept the sleep of someone who had discovered that perfection was not the absence of flaws, but the presence of love that transforms flaws into features, obstacles into opportunities, and houses into homes. His breathing grew deep and regular, matching the ancient rhythms of the castle itself, as he drifted deeper into dreams where imperfection was not something to be fixed, but something to be cherished. Gently the night came, and with it the peace that settles over all places where people have learned that home is not found in the absence of challenges, but in the presence of grace to meet those challenges with patience, creativity, and love. And peacefully, very peacefully indeed, both Eldrick and his beloved, imperfect castle settled into the deep rest that comes to all things that have found their proper place in the world. Not perfect, but perfectly themselves and perfectly, beautifully home. Softly the stones fell into silence. Gently the night embraced the sleeping castle, and peacefully all was well in the wonderfully imperfect world of Drowsy Haven. Asterisk, and so, dear listener, may your own sleep be as peaceful as Eldrick's, and may your own dreams carry you to places where imperfection is transformed by love into the most beautiful perfection of all, the perfection of being truly, completely home.